In Melbourne, you might have picked up a book or a comic from a Jesus Christian outside Flinders Street Station, or you could have seen their religious graffiti messages along Sydney's railway lines. But while they portray themselves as an altruistic Christian community living life by faith and rejecting the money motivation of work, former members have been shunned and demonised, and parents tell heartbreaking stories of losing their relationship with their child after they have joined the Jesus Christians. Welcome to Let's Talk About Sects, a podcast about cults around the world. I'm your host, Sarah Steele. Before we get into part 2 of this episode, a content warning. This podcast deals with issues that some people may find disturbing, related to emotional abuse and controlling behaviours. This episode also includes mentions of physical punishment of children, and it has a bit of coarse language. Please use your discretion as to whether this will be suitable for you and those around you who may be listening too. Please also consider supporting this project via Patreon. Let's Talk About Sects has now been running for 7 years and has always remained completely independent. It relies on listener support to remain viable. This is the second part of a 2-part episode about the Jesus Christians. If you haven't listened to the first part, I'd recommend you go back and do so now. Now on with the show. Daniel Ryer and his wife Melissa had 11 children when Daniel first started corresponding with the man behind the videos on the Voice in the Desert YouTube channel, who only ever signed off his messages with voice. Today the couple has 14 children. Considering Dave McKay's preference for people to remain unmarried and celibate with no children, in spite of his and Cherry's own choices, it's interesting that he was so open to linking up and coming to the couple's farm. Daniel and Mel both grew up in religious families and originally met in an Assemblies of God church, which they eventually came to believe was too inward-focused and not really about helping others. They married at 18, and as a young couple they were both studying and working, treading the expected path, but then decided they wanted to spend more time with their first 2 children. Daniel left his job with Hewlett-Packard and grew quite a successful eBay business from home, to the point that eBay was flying him around to speak at conferences. Then this started taking up too much of their time as well. The couple, now with 3 children, sold up and moved to country Victoria, where they bought a property in Serpentine, 200 kilometres northwest of Melbourne and 50 kilometres northwest of Bendigo. While Daniel continued to do well from work and another eBay business, and the family grew bigger in number and moved to a larger farm on 100 acres, over time there were some issues with their extended families, including the divorce of Daniel's parents. Then Daniel had a falling out with a business partner, and Mel had a traumatic birth experience with her 10th and 11th children, who were twins. This was the point where they turned to religion to help them through. The idea of a Christian community in particular was appealing, when they were really feeling isolated from their extended families and a solid support network. Daniel was speaking to me from the back of a van in Tasmania, where he had great internet, but you might hear a few small noises from the metal of the roof in the background of the recording.
At that time, basically the living by faith, trusting God more than money, not working for money and being self-sufficient and in a community that all helps each other, all those sort of things were very appealing and very much a draw. So that was the appeal, was the basic teachings of Jesus and the community living, and not reliance on money. It was something that, I've always been fascinated with.
Daniel sent me a copy of the contents of the emails that he and Voice sent back and forth, and it's amazing how quickly Voice suggests that he and the rest of his group come down in their buses to spend some time on the farm. Perhaps even for him and his wife to see it as their base and have their DVDs and printed materials shipped to. He mentions this before he's even told Daniel his name, as he explains that he and his wife are both suffering from fairly painful forms of arthritis, and may find it increasingly difficult to climb up onto the buses.
So basically, Dave and Tina, his daughter, arrived first, and then within a few days, the rest of the group arrived. And at first, it was classic love bombing, completely happy, helping and cleaning up the farm, helping with chores, the kids, with homeschooling. And it was just like this big, happy family for a few weeks until they got established. And then, and then it turned into, well, what can we sell? What can we do? And how can we make money here? And how can we get more money for the group and this and that? And it's like everything just shifted once they had established themselves in our life and felt that they could just basically take over and just tell us what to do.
Daniel started helping out with the animations for the YouTube videos as he had a background in multimedia.
That was a lot of fun, making videos and animations and bits and pieces. And we also went out what they call distributing, which is going out and, well, to put it bluntly, it's going out and begging for money. But how they framed it was very different. But so we did all that with them. We travelled around in their buses with them from the farm and around places while we're in the process of what they called forsaking all, and basically we're trying to sell up all our stuff. They would take our stuff to the markets and sell it there, and it was all going to flow back to them, all the income. And so they were there helping us, sell everything and forsake all for God, basically.
The emphasis on money struck Daniel and Mel at the time as a red flag.
There was one moment in particular where Dave got frustrated because it was taking too long to sell everything, and it was taking too long to sell the farm and all that sort of stuff. And he made the comment of, it's costing us thousands to be here to help you. We're losing thousands because we're not in the streets in Sydney, selling books. And I was just like, wow, for someone who says that it's not about money, it's like literally that's the focus, was they're there to make money off us. And his wife at one point said the same thing along the lines of, once the farm sells, we won't have a problem with money anymore, because it was just assumed that we were going to just dump it all into their lap.
Daniel also shared his experience of going out and selling Dave's materials. By this time, it wasn't just comics and tracts that the group was selling. It was books that Dave had written. One is called Survivors, with the subtitle, "You'll Be Surprised Who Gets Left Behind." It seems to be a fictional account of his earlier comic on the fall of America. A companion book is called Listeners, and the third in the trilogy is Destroyers, all covering the same end times apocalyptic events through different perspectives and framed as an answer to the New York Times best-selling Christian premillennial Left Behind series that you may have come across before. Some copies of Dave's books are published under the name Zion Ben Jonah, and in emails to Daniel, Dave mentioned that his adopted grandchildren, who he calls the triplets, although they were not born to the same mother, get a particularly good result selling the books. He wrote, "The triplets probably have an advantage in two ways. One is that one of the books is written by their grandfather and is set in Kenya, and the other is just that they are dark-skinned and people tend to be very nice to them."
They originally said to us, we go out and witness on the streets and we go out and share the gospel with people. I'm like, oh, great, I've done that before. With my brothers when we were younger, we used to go out and just chat to people on the streets and hand out little cards, and we've done all that. Yeah, I'm like, that's a lot of fun. You get to talk to people and sit down and meet people. No, and so that was how it was sold to us. And then so when we went out and did it, he goes, and this is what we hand out. And they were like actual books, not just tracts or cards, and all books that he had written. And I'm like, oh, okay. And they're like, also just ask for a donation if you can, if they're willing to give one, just to cover the cost of the books. And also it helps them value it. If they don't value it, they won't read it. So, it gives a bit of value. I'm like, oh, okay. So I went out there and ended up getting the cost of the books. I might have got rid of 8 books and I got $4.50 back, and it was just enough to cover the cost of the books. But they weren't happy with that. They were like, oh, no, no, look, it's better to get more, because then that way we've got money to give to the poor. So anything extra we give to the poor. So and so I was like, oh, okay. Went back out, got extra, brought it back. And they're like, oh, good. And then they're like, well, because we're poor, it's going to us, because we are the poor.
Daniel had a different understanding of the meaning of the word poor.
You've got a brand new laptop that you're doing your videos on, like MacBook Pro. You're driving around in a $40,000 motorhome that I saw you pay cash for. You've bought another bus over here for $11,000 cash. You've said to me that you've got $200,000 in bank accounts all over the world, and yet you're the poor. You don't know what poor is, and it's all tax free. All this money he's bringing in.
Speaking of taxpayer money, Though the Jesus Christians stopped taking unemployment benefits in 1996, according to their website, Dave and Cherry seem to have let this ideal slide as they got older, with both now receiving government pensions. Dave later challenged Daniel on his recollection and claimed he'd said that they had $100,000 in bank accounts. But Daniel's opinion is whether it's 100 or 200,000, that's not poor. Dave had previously written to Daniel that they'd packed away the kids' winter clothes, and he wasn't sure if the weather would be an issue when they arrived at the farm. Daniel said not to worry, they had plenty to share. But he was a bit surprised at how that played out, which was framed as part of the process of forsaking all.
Basically, they took our good clothing and our good shoes and our kids' good shoes and swapped it with all their shit and all their broken shoes and all this. So they literally upgraded their personal assets through this process too. And so suddenly my kids had shoes with holes in them and, torn stuff, and their kids were all nicely dressed, and Bob took all my good tools and I got all his shit tools out of his van. He got all my new stuff and I got all his old crappy broken stuff.
In the grand scheme of things, especially in terms of the types of organisations we look at in this podcast, this group was still living fairly simply with their nomadic lifestyle and such. But based on the way they portray themselves to the world, I was surprised to hear about the focus on money. Ross told me things certainly weren't that way during his time in the Jesus Christians, though Alan's divorce settlement ousting in 2011 might indicate that they had already changed a bit over time.
They put on a face of, we're not about money. And that's the big, front is, and that's what drew me in, was I thought they were not about money, but they spent all their time, all their energy going after it. And yeah, it's incredible. It was incredible to see the polar opposites of the clearly, says one thing, does another. I'm just like, how can this be more blaringly obvious? But you can't see it unless you're there, inside it. Then you see the reality of what's going on. But yeah, they put on a good front.
It wasn't long into the group's stay that Daniel and Mel's parenting was challenged by Dave.
Only after about 4 weeks of them being there, he started implementing his ideas on parenting and what parenting should be from his point of view as a old white American male. If that rings any bells or red flags, and yeah, you can understand what I'm saying. Basically, it was all about punishment. It was all about discipline. It was all about locking them in the room until they say sorry. It was all about, flicking them behind the ear if they scream or make the noise you don't want them to make. And if they don't do exactly what you want straight away, you can, and he felt he could physically punish them. And it could be the most minor infraction. Like one of my sons, he was about 7. He wouldn't hop out of the car when Dave told him to. Well, and the reason he wouldn't hop out of the car was his mum said he could be in there. But Dave decided on a whim, no, you're getting out of the car. And he's like, no. And so Dave grabbed him by the arm, twisted it to a point of almost breaking his arm, and dragged him physically out of the car in front of my wife and my kids. And my daughter, who was 16 at the time, is still says she's traumatized by that, because it was just so instant, so aggressive, and so much hate in his eyes when he did it. So, another example was my 12-year-old boy. Dave decided that he had done something wrong, and he told him to go to his room, and so he's slowly getting up off the ground, and he's not obeying quick enough, and so he physically kicks him in the backside and knocks him over. But then probably the worst was with my then 3-year-old son. I think he was about 3 or 4. Again, Dave decided he'd done something wrong, so he locked him in the back room until he apologised. And basically, we had lost control of our children to Dave and his group because we had to do what he said and had to parent and discipline the way that he said. Otherwise, we would be punished ourselves, in the sense that we'd be sit down and lectured to for hours on end until we finally agreed to do it their way. And they call them grievance meetings, but they were really just sessions where they would just pound into you verbally until you relented.
I spoke with Ross about this, and he never saw anything like it when he was involved, though he did recount a story that showed the beginnings of it towards the end of his time with the group. On their website, Making It Real, former Jesus Christians Sue and Roland recount Dave's instructions to leave their teenage son out on the streets for multiple days at a time as a punishment.
My friends had a 15-year-old son who was obviously going through a rebellious stage. And Dave just basically said, turf him out on the street to teach him a lesson. And the parents objected to doing that because he was underage, and they refused to put him out on the street. So they ended up leaving, basically.
When Sue and Roland wrote to Dave about feeling pressured to abandon their child, he called a meeting without them and the group voted to kick them out. Ross abstained from this vote.
It was just an example that Dave was starting to target parents and basically saying, I know better than you how to manage children or rebellious teenagers or whatever, and I want you to do what I say because this is going to fix them.
With Daniel's 3 or 4-year-old son, there was more to the story after Dave locked him away in a room for his perceived bad behaviour.
So anyway, he put my son in the room. He didn't want to stay in there, so he climbed out the window. Jumped out the window and took off. He ran around the veranda, and then he came to Dave. And Dave was so angry that he was disobeying him, he slapped him across the face with such force that he hit the ground, scraping his knee and had a bruise on his face. My son jumped up, ran to my wife and told her what happened, said, the big man hit me. And so Mel came to me, and I was like, what the hell? What the hell is going on? This is, he's going too far. So we went and said to him, Dave, what happened? What are you doing? And he denied, flat out lied, just said, no, never happened. Never happened. But his own grandkids saw what happened, and they went and told my older kids and their parents, and it caused a massive uproar. So we all sat down on one of these grievance meetings, and he admitted, I did hit him, yeah. And so he blatantly lie on one hand, try to see if he can get away with it. And then he's like, I did. But then he just ranted on and on how his grandkids shouldn't have gone to their parents or to anyone else, but they should have come to him first and talked to him about what they witnessed. Because of course that's what you do. You go to the abuser. No, it was so insane, his logic. No repentance, no sadness, no contrived spirit or anything. Just, you should have done it my way. And yeah, I did that, but whatever. Let's talk about other stuff. It was insanely horrible that he thought that he had the right to do that to my kids when he was only there. He's only just been there, and that's the amount of that's his ability to coercive control, and his ability to just take over the situation was so quick and so hard that this happened. And I felt powerless to do anything, and it's taken me nearly 7 years to be able to actually talk about it.
Daniel told me that even though these might seem like a couple of small instances of corporal punishment of young children, and people might think that's easy to get over, it's really had some big ongoing impacts on his family.
All we can do now is deal with it in whatever way we can, and the kids will, as they get older, have a chance and can deal with it in their own ways. But we're basically just trying to be there for them and make sure that those events didn't have a long-term effect on them. And I've seen it on it with one of them. It has had a long-term effect, and we talk about it a lot, and that's the only way I think we can deal with it, is we talk about it and flesh out these issues and try to understand why and how. And obviously he would be angry at me for allowing it to happen, and then I've got to explain the whole picture of how we got up to that point, and then he's got to process all that and then deal with my trauma so he can deal with his trauma. So it's a big process, and it may seem like small instances or small moments of discipline or whatever that he wants to call it, or basically abuse, small moments of abuse, but they have had long ringing effects. And if he was doing that just within the few weeks of meeting us,
Although Dave tended to be against marriage, as we've discussed, when a young woman named Alicia joined the group, she and an American Jesus Christian fell in love very quickly.
Dave wasn't happy with it at all. He you know, I've had people say to me, "Oh, it was a forced marriage and all this." Well, actually, it wasn't. It was kind of the opposite. Joseph and Alicia, when they met, it was almost like seeing, like love at first sight. It was actually quite cute. It was very sweet, and they literally fell for each other quite heavily and quite quickly. And so basically, they kind of forced his hand, and he didn't. Because his doctrine and what he said was, men should be single and be, because he's the whole 144,000 virgins and all this sort of stuff. And it was like he's right into all that shit, all that crazy end times, futuristic. It's going to happen soon, but it never does happen soon. Stuff. So basically, he was refusing people to marry, and he'd try to keep guys single, and and try to make sure if there were couples that didn't have kids. Another contention on our part, we had a lot of kids to begin with. So basically, Dave wasn't actually happy with them getting married, but he allowed it to happen so that he could keep them both close. That's how I saw it, because I think that if he pushed his thing, he'd lose one of his key members, which is Joseph, and he wouldn't have him anymore. And I think that's why he allowed it to happen.
The wedding ceremony between Alicia and Joseph, also known as Ellie and Jay in the group, happened on Daniel and Mel's property. The celebrations didn't go so well for Daniel.
I'm celiac, like I'm chronic celiac. I can't touch or even be near a piece of bread. That's like, or a crumb, or walk past a bakery while they're baking. But they didn't believe me. And I overheard little secret conversations like them basically saying, "Oh, I'm just trying to get attention, just trying to be different," that sort of thing. They also didn't believe that my son was autistic. He didn't believe it. He's like, "Oh no, it's just bullcrap. No, it's just bullcrap. He is autistic," and so they didn't. And so they always were against all these things, to the point where at the wedding day, Dave's wife came to me and said, "I've specially made you a gluten-free cake because you're celiac. Okay, I made this just for you. No one else is allowed to eat it." I'm like, "Oh, that's really nice. Thanks." I thought, that's great. I ate one piece. I got halfway through. I'm like, "This is really sticky." And I was like, I can't eat any more of this. And then so I put it down. I was bedridden for 3 days.
Daniel only had nice things to say about Bob, Tina's husband, and Dave and Cherry's son-in-law, including that Bob apologised about this incident when Daniel dragged himself out of bed to get a glass of water. Daniel told him he didn't need to apologise, it wasn't his fault, and Bob said maybe it was. Daniel takes this to mean that he was aware of this gluten test and didn't try to stop it.
Everyone but Bob lied about it. And Tina was like, "Oh, maybe you're allergic to something else that was in the cake, and maybe it was the soy or something." They really were trying to not let me know that they had done that, but it was clear as day.
Daniel and Mel were regretting joining the community at this point and started looking for a way out. But these people were still on their property, they felt outnumbered, and they didn't know how to get rid of them. They decided the best tactic was to keep going along as if they were committed.
So it was basically the day after the wedding ceremony at the farm, or actually the afternoon of, Dave and Cherry left. And it was interesting because I think we both knew that we weren't going to see each other again. It was how you sometimes have these intuitions that that this is it. And I think he had that too, to be brutally honest, because he actually hugged me and said, "Look after your family," which blew my mind, because I'm like, yeah, okay. And because it was against everything else he's been saying and doing. And then he was gone, and then he tried to email me, so I just ghosted him. Like, the only tactic I had was, cut it. Don't respond to another message. Don't respond to anything. And he didn't like that. He got really aggressive with the emails and was ranting a bit, and then just went quiet. But that was the last moment I saw Dave. And I literally at that moment felt, I'm not going to see you again. So I guess in my mind I'd cut off. I'm like, we're done. Now that you're walking away, I'm not going to let you back. And and then it got weird with Tina and Bob, because they were still there at the farm. And I actually thought things might get better because Dave wasn't there, but actually got worse. For the last few weeks before they left, that's when they tried to pull the rug out from under us and say, "Oh, we're going to leave, you get settled, settle all your stuff, sell the farm, and then come join us in Sydney." And we're like, "Oh, okay. Yep, okay. Sounds good." And then they turned around the next day and said, oh, actually, we can stay if you want. We really can stay if you want, because basically we've helped you so much, you want us to stay. But if you choose us to stay longer, then you've got to understand, your children are not your children, and you have to fully submit to us, you know. And that's when I was just threw back at them their words from the previous day, which was, you know, oh, no, I think it's very wise what you said yesterday, that you should go and let us settle everything and we'll meet up with you in Sydney. And Tina's eye actually was twitching and she got bloodshot. I was sitting there going, what the fuck? You know, like physical manifestation of stress. And I think she realised she was losing us, okay? What happened next is very, very culty in the sense that they were trying to put their hook in again. Just before they left, it was like a day before they were ready to go, my daughter, who was 16 at the time, came up to me and she said, they're asking me to go with them. Because you know, they say I'm friends with Ali and stuff. They're asking me to go with them. What should I say? And I said, you obviously say no. They hadn't come to us. They were literally trying to get her in the van and drive off with her. My son, who was 12 at the time, came to me and said, oh, they're asking me to go with them. I said, what the fuck? I said, okay, everybody, let's all stay in this room until they go. Is everyone accounted for? It was literally like that.
The group turned up at the farm one more time after that, and Daniel asked them to leave, which they did. He'd already called the police for backup just in case they refused to go. Daniel and his family were only involved with the Jesus Christians for about 4 months in total, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it felt like much longer.
The thing is, I've been thinking about it, I'm thinking, well, it was only 4 months, but it was 24/7 for 4 months. And it felt like 4 years. And the amount of information, time, stress, joy, sadness, all these things you go through with people living in close proximity. It's like, yeah, it was intense. And other groups all around the world may have a different experience because they're not living with Dave. He was literally there 24/7 and his family. And I think that just made it that much more intense and that much more horrible.
The family came up with some pretty incredible ways to deal with the aftermath of their experiences.
So once they left, we were just left in a state of like turmoil. There's a lot of other stuff going on in our life. And so we basically just sold up everything, but instead of giving it to them, we kept it. And we said, bugger it. We just sold up everything. Most of the stuff we sold was for a loss, but we ended up with a small amount of money in the bank and a bus that we decked out and a Prado towing a chook cage full of chickens. And we just headed off and started travelling. And we travelled and travelled and travelled. And it was a way to basically focus back on the family, back on each other, have a lot of fun and no responsibility for as long as possible. And we made jokes. That was the way that our family dealt with it. I guess there's a lot of us in our family that speak well. We're good with playing with words, you know, so we will just make these jokes and make these scenarios, always bagging out and mocking the group. And basically one of them was you couldn't say, oh, what was it? Oh, you couldn't say I'm done anymore. It's like if you finish something, you had to say I'm finished. Because if you said, oh, I'm done, they're like, oh, you're a done. And that was the surname of Bob and Tina, Done. So like, you're done, you're done. You know, it's like, it was so dumb. It was the most base, stupid humour. And then we were like, oh, we're not okay with that. We're not okay with that because there's days if we didn't like something. and we came up and during our travels, the lady that we met, another family, we said, oh, how are you finding the people and stuff? She goes, oh, yeah, we meet a few Daves around, and we're just like, what? Do you know Dave? And she's like, oh no, it's an acronym she came up with. She invented this acronym, Dickhead Analysing Virtually Everything. So that was one of the other things that became one of our jokes, was the acronym for Dave. That's how we dealt with the immediate trauma. We just made it into the ridiculous, childish jokes. And it lasted about 2 years, to be honest. It was a long time this was going on for. But it works, and we don't do it anymore. It's no longer a part of and I feel like it literally does help you move on. It basically helps create if you can laugh at it for long enough, I feel, then you realise it is actually laughable. and then it no longer has a grip on you anymore because you're always pushing it off with humour. And it worked for us. I'm not sure why, but it worked. So, yeah. And to be able to laugh and does bring those, happy feelings. It brings out the right chemicals that offsets the horror you feel inside. So, it makes a lot of sense to laugh.
The Jesus Christians eventually started publishing on their official website again, and the narrative that they had disbanded was abandoned. They use language today about being a network of Christians around the world to operate under the name Jesus Christians, though the groups are supposedly autonomous. In 2019, a Jesus Christian member known within the group as Jude was invited to speak at a church in Kenya. Jude gave a short sermon and spoke against the national ID card that Kenya was looking to introduce at the time, supporting the idea that it was a step towards the mark of the beast. The church was run by a man named Paul Mackenzie, and if you recognise that name, it's because his Good News International Ministries, also known as the Shakahola cult, hit the headlines last year when the bodies of more than 400 congregants were discovered. Many had starved to death on Paul Mackenzie's instruction, while some had been strangled or suffocated, and the numbers included almost 200 children. Paul Mackenzie is on trial for charges of murder, child torture, and terrorism. The Jesus Christians were given a mention in a Kenyan parliamentary committee report into the massacre, but there doesn't seem to be a great deal of evidence of any links outside of the one sermon. This seems like an example of where external depictions of them could rightfully feed into their feelings of persecution. But the group is very quick to go on the attack, even when the reporting appears largely factual. Journalist Elle Hardy wrote what seemed to me a balanced article about the parliamentary mention and the Jesus Christians' vehement denial of any involvement. But it's interesting to read the commentary on the article that was posted subsequently on the Jesus Christians website. Of particular note is where they take issue with Elle Hardy saying that they spent about a decade largely underground. The commentary says, by largely underground, Elle simply refers to a time when most of the Jesus Christians stopped using the Jesus Christian name and website and started separate internet ministries until they started working closer together again in 2016. It is unclear what significance Elle Hardy gives to this, though it appears to be an attempt to suggest that something sinister happened during that underground period. The fact is, throughout that underground decade, we kept in touch with our families and friends, just as we continue to do so now." End quote. It's a bit of a different story than the one told by those who were present at the meetings where they framed their intentions for the so-called implosion. Dave wrote that Elle Hardy had an apparent proclivity to deceive, and that her aim seems to be that of trying to use half-truths as evidence to support her negative narrative, instead of reporting on the most significant facts, letting the real evidence tell the story. The assessment is an interesting contrast to when Dave called Alicia's mother a Luciferian in a YouTube video entitled Strange Bedfellows. When Renee Spencer took him to court for defamation, Dave relied on defences of truth and honest opinion in both referring to her as a Luciferian, a Satanist if you like, and also in saying that she had conspired with neo-Nazis. When Dave McKay was due to give evidence in the case, he told the court that he was, quote, "quite happy to say that I will try to be totally honest in everything I say today, and I understand that there are penalties if I knowingly do not do that." He continued, "The reason for wanting to word it that way is that I can't honestly tell you that I would say the whole truth, and I don't think the court wants to hear the whole truth." After questions from the judge, he said, "What I'm going to affirm is not that I will tell the whole truth, but what I say will be the truth." The judge informed him that the oath wasn't by negotiation, and so he opted not to take it and therefore not to give evidence. This also meant that he couldn't be cross-examined. One of the defamatory imputations Dave defended was that Renee was part of a coordinated group of parents, influenced by anti-cult organisations, that was persecuting a Christian group. As part of his defence, Dave included points on how he felt Renee had been involved with persecuting the Jesus Christians, and one point was informing her daughter, quote, that she would be disinherited while she remained a member of the Jesus Christians. The judge wrote, Given that Alicia had joined the Jesus Christians and undertaken a forsake all ceremony, it is difficult to see how removing the prospect of future worldly goods would coerce Alicia to leave the Jesus Christians. It begs the question as to why Dave would be concerned about any of his followers being disinherited, if they've already chosen to forsake all and live by faith as he professes to do. In putting together the video at the centre of the court case, Dave and other Jesus Christians wrote to each other about its contents, and Dave put forward his evidence for Renee being part of a coordinated effort with other parents of group members. The judge wrote about Dave's approach, quote, "This is far from convincing evidence. At best, the defendant has engaged in supposition and guesswork. He did not hold an honest opinion that Ms. Spencer worshipped the devil, but rather seized an opportunity to present a range of allegations about the parents of members using sensationalist language." Again, an interesting contrast to what Dave expects from those who cover his own group. Daniel Ryer was a lead witness in the case. He put his hand up to do so on the basis that he realised he could help build an understanding of how the group operated. He'd seen it firsthand from the inside, with Renee's daughter's wedding ceremony to long-term member Joseph taking place on his property. He also felt ready to be able to speak about what he knew.
I did not like how I was treated there on a very base level. I didn't like the experience I had with them, and this opportunity has come up to tell my story, and I feel like I'm at a point where I can actually tell it without the emotion and, welling up with tears anymore. So now I can actually give a good representation of what happened, and why not?
Aside from one comment agreeing with a YouTube video about the Jesus Christians 6 years ago, Daniel hadn't spoken out at all about his experiences.
I felt like I'd set up a really good, strong case of I haven't dedicated my life to go after these guys at all. In fact, I've been trying to live my life and rebuild it. And the opportunity has come up to actually have a say, and I'm going to take it.
Renee Spencer won the court case and was awarded $85,000 in damages in December 2023, with an order for costs of $100,000 on top of that. Following the defamation proceedings, Channel 7's Spotlight program ran an investigation of the Jesus Christians in May 2024. The core of the Australian group were living in a suburban Melbourne house when the reporter visited, though Tina and Bob were sleeping on a queen mattress in a tent in the garage. Dave McKay told reporter Liam Bartlett that he didn't consider the group to be a cult, which he saw as a slur, but said, "I recognise we're a high-demand group." For international listeners, Spotlight is one of our more sensationalist type of programs, and Jesus Christian members shared footage they'd simultaneously recorded during their interview with Channel 7 on their YouTube channel, where they pointed out to the host that he wasn't exactly beyond criticism himself, considering past Spotlight scoops that involved some pretty grubby payments to people like Bruce Lehrmann. For our international listeners, I recommend you don't bother Googling that name. The Spotlight program drew links between the Jesus Christians and the Shakahola massacre, speaking with Kenyan Senator Tabitha Mutinda Munene, who said that they did hear from a source whose anonymity they were keeping that Paul Mackenzie had been watching a lot of Dave's videos and was influenced by them. But Dave remained very clear that he had no direct links to the preacher and that Jesus Christian messages were not dangerous. Renee Spencer's daughter suggested later in a YouTube video that Renee might be the anonymous source. Dave said on camera that he hadn't been the leader of the Jesus Christians for years and that he was retired. It's interesting that there was no question in the defamation court case that Renee Spencer was suing Dave McKay directly and no other group member. If leadership wasn't really his, it seemed quite clear that he could be held personally accountable by a court of law in Victoria for the content of the videos on the YouTube channels the group runs. I asked Ross his opinion on the leadership question. He said Dave tried to cast this in doubt even back in his day.
He was the group leader or even the founder, but again there's this dishonesty where he wanted to hide the fact that he was the leader because then he wanted to avoid being the cult leader tag, but at the same time he wanted to make sure that everyone knew he was in control. So there's all this double dishonesty about pretending he's not the leader when he really is.
Ross wrote about his observations of earlier leadership experiments. When other members were voted in to learn about heading the group from Dave, quote, "It appears that Dave was increasingly making more of the decisions and his apprentices were simply rubber stamping them." I asked Daniel what he thought about this too.
Everything revolves around him. and he does have the best position. He has the best equipment. He has the best car. He has the best, he eats first. It may seem simple compared to other cult leaders, but the premise and the practice is exactly the same, and the way that it plays out.
In an article from 1998 entitled Divine Authority on the Jesus Christians website, Dave wrote, "God has at this time and in our little community anointed me to act as leader. As long as I am doing my job right, He's not going to anoint someone else to rebel against me. If I get away from God, then I will lose my anointing and God will give authority to someone else to take my place." He told Spotlight that in his retirement it's become a rotating leadership and that they have an election every couple of years. I'm not sure where God's anointing comes into it these days. Daniel had heard something else about Dave's divine providence.
He actually told me at one point, because I asked him about the name A Voice in the Desert, and I was like, well, how did you come up with that? And he's like, well, long and short of it's about John the Baptist and being a voice in the desert of the coming of Christ and all that. And then he straight out said to me, "Oh, I'm the reincarnation of John the Baptist." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I'm the one of the two witnesses. I'm just waiting to find the other one."
The Jesus Christians have never managed to gain much of a following in person, but their YouTube channels have been much more successful. At the time of writing this episode, A Voice in the Desert has over 142,000 subscribers and more than 13.7 million total views of their 467 videos uploaded since October 2016. End Time Survivors hasn't uploaded any new videos for the last couple of years, but has over 46,000 subscribers and is coming up on 4 million total views of their 203 videos created since February 2016. In video descriptions, there's an answer to the question, "What is a voice in the desert?" that says, "The purpose of A Voice in the Desert is to point people to the message rather than the messenger." It seems that approach might be a good one when it comes to Dave McKay.
Him and Tina especially have a very, very good method of pushing people away. They're not nice to be around. They're not easy to be around. They're not friendly or kind people once you get to know them. And that's why I think they're not successful in Australia, but overseas they can hold up that front from a distance, I believe.
I asked Ross about the aftermath of his involvement, knowing how much of a shock it must have been after so many years to no longer be within this group that had formed a core part of his identity for 3 decades.
You self-blame, thinking, what did I do wrong? What did I say wrong? That sort of thing. Because you're sincere about your loving other people and caring about other people, this is not the kind of thing you would do as a Christian or anyone. So you don't expect that from people who are supposedly your brothers and sisters in Christ or whatever. You don't expect that from them, let alone anyone else. But you're just totally in shock for a while. For about a year, I was in a state of trying to comprehend what had just happened and that this chapter of my life was over with, basically. And then, after a year, I started reading about narcissism on the internet, just happened to find articles about it by random chance or divine guidance, because I was praying pretty heavily at that point about the whole thing personally. And I started discovering these articles about narcissism, and I said, now I understand him. I understand how he can just cut me off like that and it doesn't affect him. That I was part of a process of a narcissistic discard. They call it, you get discarded at the end. The relationship is no longer, you're no longer useful to him. He's decided he's got enough younger members now that he can influence. He doesn't need you anymore. You're discarded. You're no longer relevant. And just the revelation that this is the kind of person I was dealing with was both shocking and a relief. I felt it, in a sense, I felt a great relief that I finally understood what I was dealing with and that it wasn't my fault, and that many times empathetic people and intelligent people are are deceived by these kind of personalities. Because then you go through the phase of, how could I be so stupid? How could I be so deceived by this guy? But all the literature tells you, look, they target smart people. They target sensitive and intelligent people.
Daniel shared some of the aftermath and how he and his family dealt with it through humour earlier, but he had a little more to say on the subject.
Now, I guess I'm dealing with it by talking about it. And I encourage other people, once they get to this stage of where they feel comfortable and they know that they can talk about these issues without getting overly emotional about it, or or you just feel like you're at the right place. You know, if you don't feel like you're at the right place, keep working on yourself, you know. And I guess this is like so true. It's like you've got to work on yourself first. And then I guess I can't talk for other ex-members. I've only just started talking to them. Like literally we isolated ourselves and just said, no, we want nothing to do with them. So that was our way of dealing with it. It was just total cut off from everything, you know, just cut it. And so we didn't seek out ex-members to talk about our issues, all that sort of stuff. We dealt with it as a family. We dealt with it internally. Yeah, like I said before, we joked about it a lot. We had important discussions about, you know, forgiving each other and admitting to where we went wrong and how we allowed it to start, but then talking about how it overtook us and just, you know, and all those aspects have been very important, especially with the older children that were part of it. And yeah, I guess just taking it day by day, and then you get to a point where you just feel that it doesn't matter anymore. I can talk about this. I can joke about this. I mean, I can, if I wanted to do a stand-up routine about this stuff, you know, it would be brilliant. But at the same point, I also don't want to hurt people that are in there either. Like, because yeah, there's a lot of good people for sincere reasons that get caught up in this stuff on any level, and I also want to have a respect for them and help them, but also help them slowly understand. But I don't want to be, you know what I mean? Like it's that thing. I'm clearly not the cult leader. I'm not trying. I don't want to manipulate people. It's basically what I'm trying to say. But I also want them to know the truth, you know. And yeah, it's a process for sure.
Ross feels that there should be more education about narcissism and how it operates, so that people can be forearmed about these things. And I agree. If you know some of my own history, you'll know that I've been the victim of someone who I believe was a narcissist and a sociopath. Not that she was ever formally diagnosed. I don't know if I would have been able to pick it up in time to make a difference, but I'd have had a better chance if I knew what to look for. As Ross wrote in a reflection, Jesus warns that such people do exist, and sincere Christians need to learn discernment and how to recognise deceivers. Such a learning curve may only be achieved by painful experiences of being betrayed by people we naively trusted. Dave wrote on an accountability page on the Jesus Christians website, quote, "A good leader will recognise where followers have a proven record of reliability and then trust those followers within those limits. But the trust must always have limits. Just like God, you need to recognise human nature and work around it." End quote. Something Ross wrote that rang likely very true to me is that it seems to be the case that Dave judges others so harshly because he assumes that everyone is behaving just as dishonestly as he himself is. Ross also wrote about Dave's teachings on false prophets, quote, "Attention is given to obvious frauds such as TV evangelists and other preachers who make vast amounts of money from preaching. These types of false prophets are greedy for money, but money is not the only thing someone can be greedy for. Power over others can also be an incentive for some people. By focusing on some types of false prophets only, one's guard is let down to other less obvious and more sneaky wolves in sheep's clothing." In another reflection on the topic, Ross writes, "The false prophet believes he can achieve righteous ends by using dishonest means, manipulation and deception. There may or may not be a manner of self-deception about this process in that the false prophet ends up believing their own methods to be part of what makes them cleverer than others and thus more entitled to be a leader." Here's a last word from Ross.
Mostly the group attracted empaths and idealistic young people, and it just takes one narcissist to ruin the whole thing.
I'm going to leave you today with a few final thoughts that Daniel wanted to share with listeners.
The people listening to these podcasts aren't going to be active members, I don't think. they might to try to pick it apart and try to, for their group or whatever, something one comes. But I think people who listen to this podcast and others like yours consistently are people seeking healing and seeking some sort of understanding. And I guess my biggest encouragement to those people, like I was myself, years ago when I started listening to your podcast, keep going, keep listening, keep dealing with those emotions as they come up. Allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to feel all these conflicting emotions, and allow yourself to think about conflicting points of view and opinions. Be open to it all so you can actually rebuild your own mind and your own psyche around all this. And eventually you get to a point of peace. You really do. Well, I have anyway, and I hope that for others. And I guess, that's my final comments and is in trying to encourage other people like myself in this path, because it's so hard to go and talk to people like a therapist or a psychologist or stuff like this. One, you just don't know where to start. And then two, a lot of therapists and psychologists come across as a leader. They come across with the same sort of talk, the same sort of mannerisms, the same sort of tactics that were used by the leaders of these groups. And it makes it very difficult to trust people who are using tactics. They might be using it for good, but they're still using the same tactics that were used against you. So, it's tough, and it's a journey, but learning to trust again is a big thing that I encourage people to do. But very, very gently, slowly. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining me again for this episode of Let's Talk About Sects. A huge thanks to Ross and Daniel for their openness in sharing their stories with me for the show. Let's Talk About Sects is an independent, listener-funded project. Please consider supporting the show via Patreon, as your support is what makes it a viable endeavour. You can access episodes early and ad-free with your contribution at patreon.com/LTASpod. You can also listen to my audiobook, Do As I Say, which is linked in the show notes, or grab some merch. Something you can always do for free is give the podcast a rating on the podcast platform of your choice, or share it with a friend. This episode of Let's Talk About Sects was written and researched by me, Sarah Steele. Original music by Joe Gould.